Hello, staff. This is Dr. Saxon. I'm going to be sharing with you a few screencastify PowerPoints on some foundations and understandings of how we're going to be doing discipline here at Horbelt. This is the first in a series, which will give you a complete understanding and also hopefully, some tools that you can use in the class. First of all, there's some premises. One is that all sound discipline works within the context of good relationships. So, your first job as a teacher in the classroom is to develop positive relationships with your students. We're going to take and talk about that in a later video or in a later workshop that we do. But remember this: rules without relationships always lead to rebellion. The first priority in the classroom always is the teaching and learning of the intended academic curriculum, and that includes our most challenging students as well. The key for this is to find a way to get our challenging students on board. I also want to emphasize that the goal of discipline is not to punish a student, but to change a student's behavior. There's a huge difference between discipline and punishment, and sometimes we in education confuse the two. Punishment is meant to hurt, discipline is meant to educate. And so while there is a consequence and punishment is sometimes part of it, the overall attitude should be one of changing a student's behavior. Remember this as well. Good teachers rarely have poor behavior from students because sound instruction mitigates poor behavior. Think about this. If your students are engaged in what's going on in the classroom and you have their full attention, as challenging that might be to get in these days, okay, it will pull them into focusing on something else besides themselves. This is why good instruction helps students not to misbehave. The other thing that's important about dealing with discipline is to make sure you really know what happened. When an event occurs in your classroom, you've heard me say this a couple times, practice the wait a minute and make sure you really understand what's going on. And then choose to respond rather than react. Responding indicates that you're in control. Reacting means that react out of an emotion that causes you to choose a certain way of addressing what has happened. And then finally, the most important thing is maintain your composure. If you lose your composure, you lose. In dealing with management in the classroom, it's always important to remember these four simple things. One of the key elements is consistency. If you say you're going to do something, do it. Be absolutely crystal clear so students know what you expect. Make sure you don't give them mixed messages. For example, I would talk to teachers in the past 20 years who would say, okay, I'm waiting for everybody to give me their attention. And then there'd be a few students who are still talking, and the teacher would move on. This inconsistency, small though it is, tells students that you don't expect them to listen to you exactly the way you ask them to listen to you. Make sure you positively state your expectations. Students respond to positively stated requests rather than negative things. Actively engage your students in observable ways. Make sure that when you ask them to do something, it's something that they understand and that it's clear. And then the other thing is, along with the boundaries that we talk about providing in the classroom, make sure there is a continuum of strategies to acknowledge appropriate behavior. One of the ones that you've heard me talk about a lot is giving a parent a phone call home to tell them that their child, his or her child, did something well in the classroom. Remember, discipline is a process. It's something where you teach, it's something where you model, it's the inclusion of appropriate strategies. One size does not fit all. In fact, in the area of discipline, differentiation is probably one of the biggest components in finding something that works for a student who may be out of sorts. And the other thing is that whatever you expect your students to do, you want them to practice. You want to give them the time to assimilate and put into their lives what you expect them to do. Discipline is not vague or unenforceable. It's not ignoring a student when they do something that's problematic. It's not ambiguous or inconsistent. It's not a punishment which is excessive or is given to a child without support or encouragement for improving their behavior. And it's not definitely a quick fix formula. There's no magic bullet to change a child's misbehavior in the classroom. Oftentimes, it's a lot of hard work and sticking with it until you see a change in what's going on. Some inappropriate strategies working in the classroom to change student behaviors, comes from this list. Yelling is something that sometimes makes us feel good, but it doesn't work in terms of changing the student's behavior in the long run. Sarcasm, coming back at a student, backing a student into the corner, nagging. Sometimes when I see a student getting nagged, we see the eye roll, and then we know that we have lost them. Definitely not mimicking the student or begging or bribing. These are all things that are ineffective in changing a student's behavior in the class. As a teacher, your responsibility falls along two lines of thought. One is that in your classroom, you are prepared by constructing routines, having procedures, and developing rules. We're going to be talking about those in future PowerPoints as well. And then the other thing is having a clearly defined plan, which includes a hierarchical response to the situations that occur. And of course, you always have to leave yourself the concept of flexibility to address things that come up for something you have not anticipated. In the classroom, or excuse me, in a building, we have two main areas to look at for all misbehaviors. One is in the classroom, okay, and I want to reinforce with you that no two children are alike, so no one response is always appropriate. Now, you can come up with general things that address things, but often for the kids who are more challenging, different behaviors require differentiated responses. And then in the building, which we will also talk about at another time. In your classroom at the individual student level, remember your goal as a classroom teacher is to have a productive learning environment. And when there is a misbehavior that occurs with one student, it interferes only with the learning of the student involved. And oftentimes, this can be corrected without disrupting the learning of the others. What teachers need to have at this point is a witness to be aware of what's going on, and then also to moving through the classroom to take and move towards this student um, when this minor misbehavior occurs. And this is often the kind of thing where you should not stop the learning activity to address the behavior, but you do it kind of circumspectly. And at this first level of misbehavior, you want to ask yourself this question: what's going on? What can I do to address the behavior without stopping the lesson? The lesson, what the student is doing, does not cause physical or mental harm. It's not illegal. It does not interfere with the learning of others. And it does interfere with the learning of the misbehaving student. So you want to make sure that what you do is focused on that that misbehaving student. Here are some examples, and of course, there are many more. Not having the appropriate equipment, supplies, and or materials, not having a pencil often falls in this category. In the classroom, if I had a student that didn't have a pencil, I just gave him a pencil. It was not a hill worth dying on, and there were always extra writing utensils left on the floor that I just picked up and put in a can and gave him out when it was time for me to provide a student with a pencil. Sleeping in class, daydreaming, being off task, doing another assignment, failing to turn in homework. These are all things that can be done quietly without drawing a lot of negative attention to the student. Useful strategies that you can use, and you should put this in your toolbox of handling a kid. The master teachers always have things like this in their toolbox of strategies. One is the look. You should be able at this point in your career to look at a student and stop them dead in their tracks. Proximity is another good one. Walk over to where a student is who is misbehaving and just stand by them. When you are providing material to the students in the classroom, use the student's name in a sentence. Ask that student a question. Or as you're walking through the classroom, tap that student's desk. This way, you can take and exhibit unobtrusive behaviors which send a clear message to the student, but don't stop you from teaching the lesson that's at hand. In the classroom, a second level of misbehaviors occurs when, again, the productive classroom environment is the highest priority for the classroom teacher. This misbehavior occurs in the classroom and disrupts the learning of the other students. So, examples that fall into this category are things like failing to follow a reasonable request, talking at inappropriate times, blurting things out, horseplay, being out of the seat without permission, improper use of equipment, and not following directions. And again, there are multiple ways that you can take and address it, but because it is something that disrupts the entire learning environment, it's something that needs to be addressed with the class as a whole. And of course, you can think of other examples that fall into this category. What you need to do for this level, and of course other levels as well, is in your mind have a plan of increasing consequences or stepped ways of dealing with things that occur in your class. Always, always, always remind the students first what the rules are after you've practiced, wait a minute, to ascertain what is going on. It's not a reprimand, okay? You do the whole class at once. You don't single anyone out. You direct it to one or two students, and you do not need to approach the student. We remind the children over and over and over again because they are children. And we do not approach them with magical thinking and think just because we say it one time, it's going to be listened to. That's where we want to go to, okay? But it's something that we have to work towards. Next step is a warning. Okay, the student is approached. The warning can be either verbal or written. It could be a mark on the board. Okay, step three, okay, could be an infraction slip as an extension of your classroom discipline, not a replacement for it. But we're going to come back to this later on because this is going to be something that we do later on in the hierarchy of consequences, okay, before you send a student to the classroom. And then, of course, if it's an emergency, if something happens, which is an egregious misbehavior, you send the student to the office. Whenever a student is sent to the office, we have to make sure that you take and do a discipline referral and also let the office know what is going on. So when students show here, we have an idea of what has occurred. This is what I was talking before about having a list of strategies in between practicing wait a minute and giving a verbal warning to sending it down to the office referral. There always should be several steps in between something that occurs with a student in the classroom and before they come to the main office. There are things like you can take and redirect their attention, you can stop and wait, a verbal reprimand, you can change a student's seat. You can, this year, as we've talked about a number of times, implement the restorative circle. Always, 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 if you have an issue with a child in the classroom, make sure you call the parents. They are our best resources, and most all parents want to help you help their child succeed. One of the things that is really beneficial is when you call a parent and tell them something positive that their child has done. It goes light years in changing behavior. And then finally, we also expect teachers to handle their own lunch and recess detention, not because we don't want to do the job, but because you, as a teacher, when you give somebody else that right to do that, give away your power and level of respect that teachers have for you. It's not a matter of who, it's a matter of what. And students want to know that you can handle them in class and handle them with respect and also firmness. Remember when you write a referral to the main office, okay, and this is something I've said to my teachers for the 20 years that I've been in administration. What you're saying to me is that you've exhausted all your resources to handle the situation. And when that occurs, you also relinquish your right for input. So if there's something that happens and you're not used to putting a lot of information on a referral, I want to make sure that you go back and before you sign off and before we address it, make sure we know all the details that we need to, because what you're doing when you give us that referral is saying that you want us to handle it from then on, and we want to take sure we want to make sure that we handle it in a way that addresses the circumstance that has happened. Remember, in the classroom, when you're dealing with setting up an environment that's conducive for student learning, the things you always need to have are classroom rules, which we're going to talk about shortly, consequences, and then also positive consequences. All of these things are important for setting up an environment that helps students to learn what you want them to learn. There's a lot of positive consequences I've seen in the building here. There's a lot of people here are doing some really good things to do. Here's some more ideas. Okay, a lot of them are very simple, very quick. Okay, and yet make a whole world of difference for the students when they are given those. I'm also again going to send with you this video, this little booklet that came from the subservice that we interviewed a couple years ago. It's on classroom management, and in the booklet, there's other strategies for um, dealing with things like establishing a tone, how to talk to students, setting up rules and procedures and routines. And I just found it was a great resource to have and to share with you as you set up your classroom management as well. Okay. Hopefully, this was something that gave you a start for understanding how we're going to be doing classroom management this year in working with the kids. And there is more to come.